Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Unilateral annexation of occupied territory is illegal under international law, but this is exactly what Israel intends to do when it comes to the West Bank. On this edition of the program, we discuss why Israel is doing this, international reaction, and the fate of the Palestinians. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by my guest, Ramzy Baroud in Seattle. He's a journalist and author. And in Tel Aviv, we have Gideon Levy. He is a columnist for Haaretz. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Okay, let me go to Gideon first in Tel Aviv. I've been reading this process of preparing the Israeli population and the international community for the annexation of the West Bank. They're calling it applying sovereignty. Why in the world are they using that term? It sounds very Orwellian to me. And the way my research of this prior to our gathering here is that it's kind of ambiguous exactly what applying sovereignty is. What percentage of the West Bank? It's very unclear. Is this all done intentional to be confusing, or is they're showing some kind of trepidation before they make the decision? Go ahead, Gideon.
First of all, they call it in all kinds of names, but the real name, which should have been declaring an apartheid state. There is no other name to declare it, because as you know, Peter, they have no intention to give any kind of equal rights to the Palestinians living in those territories. They have no intention to ask the Palestinians what are their ambitions, what are their wills. They are totally excluded, the natives. So by the end of the day, they will do anything possible to hide the very simple fact that we are dealing with an apartheid system. But I'm not sure it's going to happen. I mean, I don't know if it's about being discreet or not having anything to offer. My feeling is that Washington got cold feet out of this, and Israel has to obey to Washington. And I'm not sure much will come out of it. Very soon we'll know. I mean, the coming days, maybe there will be some hollow declaration, symbolic. But by the end of the day, Peter, you and I, we know that the annexation started 53 years ago. We don't need any declarations. The annexation happened already. The Green Line died already. The occupied territories, the occupation is not temporary. It's all done already.
You know, Ramzy, what is the point in doing this? Is this ideologically driven? Is it security driven? Is it personal ambition driven? I mean, what is the point? I mean, because it already has an apartheid-like quality on the West Bank already. Oslo is a dead letter, has been for a very long time. And we have President Trump come into office, and from what I understand, maybe I'm wrong, but Netanyahu really never talked about annexation until Trump was president. Go ahead, Ramzy.
Well, that's correct. There have been a lot of talk in Israel itself about annexation, but that kind of like progressively been taking place with the kind of the fringes of the right wing and the ultra-right movements. Not until Trump came to power, as you said, that Israel's understanding of annexation and the opportunity that they found in Trump and Kushner in particular being in these positions, they felt it's really quite unprecedented, and it was like almost like some sort of a political bonanza happening there, where everything that Israel has requested, annexing the Golan Heights and expanding the settlements and doing whatever they wanted to do to besiege Gaza. Basically it was an Israeli wish list, and every single one of the Israeli items have been met with complete and utter American support, and this is what's been going on. Now the annexation, I think, is really related more to Israeli politics than anything else. We know that Netanyahu has been quite struggling for quite some time now. 3 elections, trying to get a mandate to stay out of prison, to stay out of court. So he needed to do everything. He needed to pull every trick out of his bag in order for him to appeal to the notorious right-wing constituency in Israel. And sadly, when I say the right-wing constituency in Israel, I'm not talking about the fringes. I am talking about mainstream society in Israel. And he thought that annexation is good.
It's all right-wing now. I mean, it's just to what degree it's right-wing. That's how I understand it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Peter. I mean, we are reaching a point in which very few Israelis even identify with the so-called left, even though I have my own interpretation of what constitutes a left in Israel and what doesn't. And he thought this is going to be the move that is going to end all political doubts regarding his leadership. And this is why he committed to this. And as Gideon has said, it might go through, it might not, but I personally don't think it really matters so much, because look what happened in Jerusalem in 1980. Israel annexed Jerusalem. It changed nothing. We Palestinians, our relationship to our city hasn't changed. The international community's definition of Israeli occupation in Jerusalem hasn't changed. And nothing is going to change whether the annexation go through or not.
You know, Gideon, if annexation in one form or another, because from what I understand, there's up to 3 different plans that could be pushed. What is the fate of the Palestinians? I mean, are they going to be stateless? What about the Palestinian Authority? I mean, you know, all of Israel's goals are being focused on, even if they're ambiguous, but the Palestinians are never spoken about in any of this that I can tell. Go ahead, Gideon.
That's the core of the problem, that nobody counts them, that nobody asks them, that nobody really cares about them. And the world, namely the United States and Europe, all they want is just silence. Continue with your occupation, but don't bother us with annexations. That's the message of the world to Israel. And who are the victims? The victims are obviously the Palestinians. You know, we are dealing now with 2nd and 3rd generation of people who are living under this brutal occupation without any perspectives, without any basic rights. And the only question we should raise toward any Israeli and any American and any European: do the Palestinians have the right to be equal citizens of any country in the world? Will it be a binational state or a Palestinian state? Do they at all deserve the right that any other citizen in the world deserves, or they are doomed to live as second-grade citizens forever? I want an answer. I want to know from the Israeli government, from the Israeli army, what do you expect them to do, and what are you offering them? Because by the end of the day, we know the answer, as you know. The answer is no.
Ramzy, what Israel is demanding of the Palestinians that they accept a form of Zionism, okay? Because without that, then they can no longer make any claim of being a democratic state, because they're occupying people that have no rights and no voting rights. I mean, you can't have your Zionist vision and be a democratic at the same time. That is a quandary that they can't get around. Go ahead.
Absolutely. One of the main issues, and I think that's one of the misperceptions that the Israelis have, or the Israeli government rather has, is that 25 years plus of the so-called Oslo process has created, or the peace process has created a new culture in Palestine, a new class in Palestine, of people who are willing to sign off on anything to keep their privilege and to keep their status. And they were under the impression that those people, that class, I'm of course referring to the Palestinian Authority, but the culture that morphed along with the Palestinian Authority, they have that kind of power over the Palestinian people. They take us wherever they want us to go. And that's where Israel is sadly mistaken, that regardless of the nature of the compromises, there are certain red lines that no Palestinian, not even Mahmoud Abbas, can possibly cross. And this is something that Israel is going to learn, I think, in more and more in coming months and years, that the Palestinian people are in no mood for compromising, neither on the status of Jerusalem, nor on their, not just the issue of sovereignty, but the issue of rights. They don't see themselves as lesser. And I know exactly what Gideon has meant when he was referring to, the question that he wanted to ask the Israeli government and the Israeli army. But I tell you, as a Palestinian, if you ask us that question, our relationship with our land hasn't changed. Our relationship, our understanding of our rights hasn't changed. And our resistance, therefore, will continue in all forms and all means necessary in order for us to achieve our rights and to finally be able to assert ourselves as a relevant party, as opposed to this party that is being ignored and overlooked all the time.
Gideon, one of the interesting things that, I guess everyone's forgotten it because it's so easily to forget, is the deal of the century, okay? Mr. Kushner's fantasy. But, there were, at least embedded in it, obviously, I looked at some of the documents that were released. It was very strange. It was about economics and investment and who would pay for it. And again, Palestine was more or less forgotten. But, even within Kushner's plan, there is a sense of some kind of Palestinian state. This is where the White House, the State Department, could get some cold feet here, because basically all of this engineering with the deal of the century is all thrown out the window if the annexation proceeds. Go ahead, Gideon.
I could only wish Mr. Kushner to live in this kind of state as he's offering it to the Palestinians. It's obviously not a state, it's another form of Bantustan. It has nothing to do with a state. Even when we were speaking about a state within the 67 borders, in those 22%, which still the Palestinians are dreaming to get of their original land, even then it was never meant to be an equal state like any other state in the world, basic things. Army, currency, free access, airport, port, all those things which are so normal to each of us, were part of them at least never offered to the Palestinians, even in the most maximum generous offers that they got. And therefore, I think that we should really realize that Israel never had an intention to enable a creation of a Palestinian state. The creation of a Palestinian state, unfortunately, is off the table, and we should start to talk about equal rights, because that's the only left solution.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here, gentlemen. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our program on Israel's possible annexation of the West Bank. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're just talking about Israel's annexation of the West Bank. Okay, let's go back to Ramzy in Seattle. Gideon mentioned at the very end of the first part of the program here. I was brought up understanding the Palestine-Israel conflict through Western media eyes, through the Israeli lobby in Washington. And they always told us about the two-state solution. And I can't count the number of presidents that made their bid to do it. But as Gideon said, that was never really a possibility. It was never believed in whatsoever. Oslo was a shell game, okay? And I don't think the Palestinian Authority acquitted itself very well, even to this day. I'll be very honest about that. It was a payoff in many ways. But, in the United States right now, you have Trump will do more or less anything for Israel, at least up until this point, because I strongly believe that he sees no downside. Okay, move the embassy to Jerusalem. Okay, so what? It only helps me with my donors and with my base, okay? Trump will give back the Golan Heights as if he had the right to give anything back, okay? This is how it plays in domestic politics in the United States, because very, very rarely in mainstream media did you ever get the other side. There is no other side. There's only Israel's side. And the fate of the Palestinians is just, it is a asterisk, it's a footnote. But they have been banding around a two-state solution for decades right now. With this annexation, that's a dead letter. How do they explain that? Go ahead, Ramzy.
Well, I think that's really Israel's challenge. Is Israel ready to let go of this ruse of the two-state solutions and say, we have reached the end game, we are ready to move beyond it? And of course it's a ruse, it's a carrot that has been dangling in front of the face of Palestinians for such a long time. The game has been played so well, not just by the Americans and the Europeans and the Israelis, mind you, but also by other fellow Arab states and by the Palestinian Authority itself. It explains its failures, its corruptions, always by this idea that Mr. Abbas will go to the United Nations, will give this fiery speech, will come back with a state, and everything is going to be okay. But sadly, over time, the transition to that state became the status quo. So we are just sitting there waiting for that state that never arrived. And now Israel felt that this is the time to move beyond this and consolidate its power and say it's over. No states, we will now shape the future of this region the way that will fit our interests or not. And that's where the main question comes in. Strategically, for the long run, is Israel ready to reach that end game or not? Personally, I don't think that Israel is strategically ready for that, because they could not get anyone else aside from Mr. Trump and Kushner and Friedman and a couple of others to agree. Not even within the US Congress itself there is agreement. In fact, the vast majority of the Democratic Party are against this. So they might be up to a shock, and maybe they feel that they have moved a little bit too soon on this point.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And it's interesting, and I'm sure both of you follow American politics, if Trump is for something, then the resistance is against it, okay? And in this way, it kind of works in a interesting way, okay? I mean, because Trump has been pushing this so much. Gideon, what are the possibilities, and I want to ask Ramzy this too, what is the possibility of a third intifada if we see this move forward?
I think the Palestinians are right now in one of their weakest moments in history ever since '48. They are lacking leadership, they are divided, and above all, they are lacking spirit of struggle. I'm, as you know, traveling at least once a week to the occupied territories. I don't meet politicians, I just meet the grassroots, the direct victims of the occupation. And you see that this generation is lost. I'm very sorry to say so, but this generation is lost. Israel succeeded in the second intifada really to crash them down. And part of the leadership was killed, part of the leadership is in jail. And the old leadership is old and old-fashioned. And I think we'll have to wait for another generation to wake up and create a new reality. Right now, there might be some violence, there might be some sporadic actions, individual actions. You will not see a real uprising.
Same question to you, Ramzy. What is the possibility, what would be the possible reaction if Israel starts officially declaring?
I will collect my courage and say publicly I disagree with you on this, despite the fact that I agree with him pretty much on everything else he said. I have written the history of the first Palestinian Intifada and the second Intifada in my books, and there is one thing that I always notice that's quite interesting, that Intifadas don't happen as a result of mobilized organization. They don't happen as an outcome of an existing strength. To the contrary, they respond to the weakness that exists within the Palestinian society. So Intifadas, popular uprisings, do not liberate land per se, but rather their usefulness in Palestinian history has always been to respond to the existing weakness of the Palestinian leadership, the feeling of betrayal by Arab neighbors and brethren, and the feeling for the need that the people need to step up and take the responsibility. It is extremely difficult, Peter, to kind of pinpoint a date and a time and the situation in which uprisings are possible. The Palestinian people are very resourceful and they have incredible amount of energy, and they could at any time surprise us by something. And here's the other thing. Intifadas also yield leadership. If you look at the first Palestinian Intifada of '87, the new leadership that was created in Palestine was a result of that first Intifada, and so forth. So although we cannot really tell when will the Palestinians revolt and in what form they will revolt, I think they would surprise us because the timing is always in their hands.
Gideon, to what degree do the settlers hold Israeli politics hostage? Because, I mean, recently Netanyahu met with settlers, and, I mean, they're the maximalists. They want everything, all, and now. And Netanyahu understands, at least you have to give him this, he has a good instinct survival, okay? That's probably the nicest thing I can say about the prime minister. But he has to look over his shoulder also at the United States, because if the United States doesn't give him some kind of tacit approval, he's going to be on very shaky ground, and he knows it. But is he held hostage, and Gantz and other political figures being held hostage by the settlers?
From 1 to 10, 10.
Okay.
Look, that's a long history. It didn't start with Netanyahu. The settlers are the strongest pressure group in Israeli society, and they blackmailed all governments. And I don't blame them. I blame the governments who surrendered. And it started with the Zionist left. It started with labor. I mean, labor is to be accused about the settlements project much more than Likud and Netanyahu. He just continued what labor enabled for so many years. The settlers are very devoted, very, very powerful, know how to blackmail. They are always unsatisfied. If you'll offer them Jordan and Iraq, they will demonstrate against, because what about Libya? And when they'll get Libya, they will be very, very angry at the government that they don't offer them Saudi Arabia. For them, the sky's the limit. And unfortunately, they are facing indifference of the majority of the Israeli society who has no interest in the settlements project, who had never been there and couldn't care less about it. But this apathy on one hand, and their devotion, and they are really without any borders. They use all the most cynical, powerful power games in order to achieve their goals, and we have to admit they do it very successfully.
You know, Ramzy, again, it's a wild card how Netanyahu's government's going to proceed, and the Trump administration as well. But I think it's quite clear that the European Union, the member countries of the European Union, will absolutely reject this, and the vast majority of the members of the United Nations General Assembly will condemn this here. Israel is often condemned in international bodies, and it has Washington's back. But as Gideon has pointed out, it's a little bit more dicey because, as you well know, living in America, the polarization of politics there, it's probably the most extreme in our lifetime. So this is going to be very delicate timing. And just as Gideon pointed out, I mean, Netanyahu just may get cold feet and just postpone this. Go ahead.
Right. So even if the European Union take a strong position on this, sadly they are not going to back up that position with anything practical on the ground. I know that there are initiatives here in the US at the Congress by various Democratic Party congressmen who are trying to actually create a degree of accountability, that if Israel moves forward with this, Israel, the Americans support the $3.8 billion that are given to Israel just willy-nilly every year, they would have to help back. There will be conditions and so forth and so on. I doubt that anything practical will come out of it, although I appreciate the effort. I actually don't think that the Europeans have the backbone to come and actually put real conditions and pressure Israel. So in other words, the issue is now largely in the hands of the Trump administration and the Netanyahu administration. They will move forward if they think that this is strategically and politically beneficial. But let me just remind everyone of something here, is that the Jordan Valley, which will be included largely in this annexation, has been practically not just occupied, but kind of practically annexed as well. The vast majority of the Jordan Valley is inaccessible to Palestinians. They can't actually go there, right? So in as far as the Palestinian farmer, the Palestinian worker, student, ordinary person, annexation will not change much on the ground. The soldier is the soldier, the settler is the settler. I mean, the fact that all of these settlers have been living in occupied territories, that's in itself a violation of international law. And effectively, that's also an annexation. And we Palestinians have been dealing with this for so many years, yelling at the international community, please look what is happening. Israel has violated every norm of how an occupying power should be behaving. And very little tangible came out of it. I don't think anything practical will come out of this annexation, whether it moves forward or not. My only hope is that this is going to be the last nail in this, the coffin of the so-called peace process. So we can move forward with a new plan, a new thinking, a new strategy, perhaps a one-state solution in which we can all coexist as equals in that land.
Well, we've run out of time, gentlemen. All I'd like to say is that if Western audiences, particularly American audiences and voters, knew the truth, they would certainly feel very, very differently about it. But that's the media and the political class. They drive that. I want to thank my guests in Tel Aviv and in Seattle. And I want to thank my viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.